You. Yes, the one who apologized for the way she cries. The one who learned to shrink herself into corners where light doesn't reach, believing that love only stays if you become less. I see you. I see the architecture of your silence, the blueprint of your heart drawn in invisible ink, waiting for someone with the right kind of eyes to notice. You think you're difficult to love because the world taught you that gentleness is weakness, and that feeling too deeply is a flaw in the code. But what if I told you that you're not broken? What if the problem was never you, but the operating system you were trying to run on? What if you've been standing in front of doors that were never built to open for someone like you, someone who feels in frequencies most people can't even hear? You are not hard to love. You just love the wrong way, for the wrong people, for far too long. You've been carrying this belief like a stone in your chest. This quiet, heavy certainty that something about you is too much, or not enough, or bent in a way that makes you unfit for the kind of love you see in movies or hear about in songs. You've watched people leave. You've felt the shift in their tone, the cooling of their words, the way their eyes stopped lingering on yours. And every time it happened, you turned inward. You asked yourself what you did wrong. You replayed conversations like corrupted files, searching for the line where you said too much, cared too hard, needed too deeply. Society taught you this. It taught you that love is supposed to be easy, effortless, a frictionless glide into someone else's life. It told you that if you're struggling, if you're feeling unseen, if you're pouring yourself into someone and getting back only echoes, then you must be the problem. You must be too intense, too emotional, too complicated, too much work. And so you started editing yourself. You learned to mute your needs. You became fluent in the language of, I'm fine when you weren't. You turned your heart into a museum where people could visit, but never stay, because you believed that staying required less of you than you were capable of being. But here's what they didn't tell you. Love isn't supposed to feel like an apology. It's not supposed to require you to become smaller, quieter, more convenient. Love, the real kind, the kind that builds civilizations and launches rockets and rewrites the code of what's possible. That kind of love doesn't ask you to diminish. It asks you to expand. It asks you to become more of who you are, not less. And the people who made you feel like you were hard to love, they weren't wrong about themselves. They just didn't have the capacity to hold what you were offering. You see, most people operate on low bandwidth. They've been conditioned to prefer shallow connections, surface-level interactions, relationships that don't require them to grow or change or question the comfortable narratives they've built about themselves. They want love that fits into their existing architecture, without requiring renovations. And when you showed up with your depth, your questions, your refusal to pretend that everything is fine when it's not, you didn't fit. Not because you're defective, but because you require a different kind of infrastructure. You require someone who's willing to build something new, something custom, something that can handle the voltage of who you actually are. But instead of finding those people, you kept trying to compress yourself into spaces that were never designed for you. You tried to be the kind of partner who doesn't ask for much, who doesn't need reassurance, who can exist in the margins of someone else's life without complaint. You tried to love people who were afraid of intensity, afraid of honesty, afraid of anything that might crack open the carefully maintained surface of their existence. And when it didn't work, when they pulled away, when they called you needy, when they made you feel like your love was a burden, you believed them. You internalized their limitations as your flaws. You started watching yourself through their eyes. You became hyper-aware of every text you sent, every emotion you expressed, every moment you reached out for connection. You developed an algorithm for self-censorship, a complex calculation of when it was safe to be yourself and when you needed to perform a more palatable version. You learned to wait, to hold back, to test the waters before diving in. You became an expert at reading rooms, at sensing when your presence was too much, at knowing exactly how to make yourself smaller to make others more comfortable. And the cruelest part? It worked, sometimes. People stayed a little longer when you needed less. They were kinder when you pretended to be simpler. They found you easier to be around when you hid the parts of you that felt too deeply, questioned too much, wanted more than surface-level connection. So you kept doing it. You kept performing this reduced version of yourself, believing that this was the price of being loved. You kept thinking that if you could just get the formula right, if you could just figure out exactly how much of yourself to show and how much to hide, then someone would finally stay. But here's what happened instead. You lost yourself in the performance. You became so good at adapting to other people's comfort zones that you forgot what your own edges felt like. You stopped knowing what you actually wanted because you'd spent so long trying to want only what was convenient for someone else. You stopped trusting your own feelings because you'd been told so many times that they were too much, too intense, too complicated. You developed a voice in your head that sounded like all the people who couldn't handle you, and that voice became your primary narrator, your internal critic, your constant reminder that you needed to be less. And that voice told you stories. It told you that your desire for deep connection was neediness, that your honesty was drama, that your questions were accusations, that your feelings were problems to be solved rather than information to be honored. It told you that love is supposed to be light and easy, and that if it feels heavy, if it requires work, if it asks you to be vulnerable and brave and willing to grow, then you're doing it wrong. It told you that the right person would make everything effortless, that true love doesn't struggle, that if you're experiencing friction, it's because you're not meant to be together. But that's not how engineering works. That's not how building anything real works. You don't create something extraordinary by avoiding difficulty. You don't launch a rocket by hoping everything will be easy. You don't build a sustainable future by only doing what's comfortable. Real things, things that last, things that matter, things that change the trajectory of your life, require struggle. They require honesty. They require a willingness to face problems rather than avoid them, to work through conflicts rather than around them, to choose growth over comfort. And the people who told you that you were hard to love, they were choosing comfort. They were choosing the path of least resistance. They were choosing relationships that didn't challenge them, that didn't require them to examine themselves, that didn't ask them to be more than they already were. And when you showed up asking for honesty, for depth, for real connection, you were asking them to do something they weren't willing to do. You were asking them to grow. And growth is uncomfortable. Growth requires you to shed old versions of yourself, to question your assumptions, to become something you weren't before. Most people aren't ready for that. Most people would rather stay comfortable. So they made you feel like the problem. They made you feel like your needs were excessive, your feelings were too much, your desire for connection was a character flaw. And you believed them because you didn't have another framework. You didn't realize that their inability to meet you wasn't about your worthiness. It was about their capacity. You didn't understand that you weren't too much. You were just with people who had too little to offer. Let me tell you something about systems. I've spent my life building them: rockets, electric cars, neural networks, companies that people said were impossible. And the first thing you learn when you're trying to build something that's never been built before is this: the right solution often looks wrong to people who are still operating within old paradigms. When we first started SpaceX, everyone in the aerospace industry told us we were crazy. They said reusable rockets were impossible, that we were wasting time and money on something that defied conventional wisdom. But conventional wisdom was built on old assumptions, old technologies, old limitations that no longer applied. Love is the same way. The conventional wisdom about relationships, the cultural programming you've absorbed from movies and magazines and well-meaning friends, it's based on old models. It's based on the assumption that love should be easy, that the right person will make everything simple, that if you're experiencing difficulty, it means something's wrong. But that model is designed for shallow connections, for relationships that don't go very deep, for people who want companionship without transformation. That model works fine if you're content with surface-level intimacy, with partners who never truly know you, with a life where you're always performing a role instead of showing up as yourself. But you're not content with that. You never have been. From the beginning, you've been someone who wanted more, who wanted honesty instead of performance, depth instead of surface, real connection instead of convenient companionship. You've been someone who asks questions, who seeks truth, who refuses to pretend that everything's fine when it's not. And that's not a flaw. That's not what makes you hard to love. That's what makes you capable of real love, the kind that actually transforms people, the kind that builds something lasting. The people who couldn't handle that, the ones who made you feel like you were too much, they weren't operating on the same level you were. They were still running old software, old programs designed for relationships that never go deeper than the comfortable surface. They wanted someone who would fit into their existing life without requiring changes, without asking difficult questions, without pushing them to grow. They wanted a partner who would be content with breadcrumbs of attention, who wouldn't notice inconsistencies, who would accept words without requiring action. They wanted someone who would make them feel good about themselves without challenging them to be better. And you tried to be that person. You really did. You tried to ignore the inconsistencies, to accept the breadcrumbs, to be content with less than what you needed. You told yourself that maybe you were asking for too much, that maybe your expectations were unrealistic, that maybe this was just how relationships worked and you needed to adjust your standards. You learned to celebrate the bare minimum, the occasional text, the rare moment of vulnerability, the infrequent instances when they showed up the way you needed. You trained yourself to be grateful for scraps because you believed that was all you deserved. But your heart knew better. Your heart kept sending you signals that something was off, that you were settling, that this wasn't what love was supposed to feel like. Your body knew better. It manifested in anxiety, in the pit in your stomach when you checked your phone, in the way you couldn't fully relax because you were always monitoring their mood, their tone, their level of engagement. Your intuition knew better. It whispered that you were betraying yourself, that you were accepting less than you were worth, that you were participating in your own diminishment. But you ignored those signals. You overrode them with logic, with rationalizations, with the voice that said you were being too demanding, too sensitive, too needy. You convinced yourself that this was just how love worked, that everyone compromises, that you needed to be more understanding, more patient, more accepting of their limitations. You told yourself stories about how they were going through something, how they had their own struggles, how you needed to give them space and time and grace. And those things might have been true, but they didn't change the fundamental equation you were giving, more than you were receiving. You were showing up fully while they showed up partially. You were building while they were maintaining. Here's what I've learned about building. You can't build something real with someone who's not willing to do the work. You can have the best design, the most efficient processes, the clearest vision. But if your partner isn't committed to the same goal, if they're not willing to put in the same effort, if they're not showing up with the same level of investment, you're building alone. And building alone while pretending you're building together? That's exhausting. That's demoralizing. That's how you end up feeling like you're hard to love, because you're doing all the work of two people and still coming up short. The wrong people will take everything you offer and still make you feel like it's not enough. They'll take your honesty and call it drama. They'll take your depth and call it intensity. They'll take your loyalty and call it neediness. They'll take your standards and call them unrealistic. They'll take your willingness to grow and call it instability. They'll reframe every strength as a weakness, every gift as a burden, every act of love as evidence that something's wrong with you. And if you're not careful, if you don't have a strong enough sense of who you are, you'll start to believe them. That's what happened, isn't it? You started believing that the problem was you. You started thinking that if you could just figure out how to need less, feel less, want less, then you'd finally be lovable. You started treating your own heart like a problem to be solved, a bug in the system that needed fixing. You approached your own emotions like they were glitches, rather than information, like they were obstacles rather than guidance. You became your own worst critic, internalizing all the messages from people who couldn't handle the fullness of who you are. But emotions aren't glitches, they're data. They're your internal sensors telling you what's working and what's not. What feels aligned and what feels off, what's nourishing you and what's depleting you. When you felt anxious in relationships, that wasn't evidence that you were too needy. It was evidence that your needs weren't being met. When you felt exhausted from always initiating, always pursuing, always being the one who cared more, that wasn't evidence that you cared too much. It was evidence that the other person wasn't carrying their share of the weight. When you felt small and apologetic for wanting honesty and depth, that wasn't evidence that you wanted too much. It was evidence that you were with someone who offered too little. Your feelings were trying to tell you something. They were trying to wake you up, to get your attention, to make you realize that you were in situations that weren't good for you. But instead of listening to them, you tried to manage them. You tried to make them quieter, smaller, more convenient. You treated your own needs like an inconvenience, like something you needed to minimize so you wouldn't scare people away. You became an expert at self-soothing, at talking yourself down from your own feelings, at convincing yourself that you were overreacting. And the people who should have been showing up for you, they were grateful for your self-sufficiency. They were grateful that you didn't ask for much, that you managed your own feelings, that you made it easy for them to stay comfortable. They appreciated that you didn't push, didn't demand, didn't require them to grow or change or step outside their comfort zone. They liked that version of you, the reduced version, the easy version, the version that required nothing from them. But that version wasn't actually you. It was a performance, a strategic reduction of yourself, designed to make you more palatable to people who couldn't handle your fullness. And here's the tragedy. Even that wasn't enough. Even when you made yourself smaller, even when you needed less, even when you performed perfect patience and understanding, they still left. Or they stayed but never fully showed up. Or they kept you at arm's length, close enough to benefit from what you offered, but never close enough to be truly vulnerable, truly committed, truly present. Because the problem was never that you were too much. The problem was that they weren't capable of more. They didn't have the capacity for depth, for honesty, for the kind of love that requires you to be brave and vulnerable and willing to grow. So now you're standing at a crossroads, and you have a choice to make. You can keep believing that you're hard to love, that the problem is something intrinsic to who you are, that you need to keep trying to be less so that someone will finally choose you. Or you can do something radical. You can choose to believe that you were right all along, that your desire for depth wasn't neediness, that your honesty wasn't drama, that your standards weren't too high, that you weren't too much. You were just with people who had too little to offer. This is the transformation. This is where everything shifts. This is where you stop trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you and start building your own architecture. This is where you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What do I actually need?" This is where you stop performing a reduced version of yourself and start showing up fully, knowing that the right people won't be intimidated by your depth. They'll be drawn to it. But let me be clear. This transformation isn't about becoming harder, colder, more cynical. It's not about building walls or protecting yourself by refusing to be vulnerable. That's just another form of shrinking, another way of making yourself smaller to avoid getting hurt. Real transformation means expanding, not contracting. It means becoming more of who you are, not less. It means learning to take up space instead of apologizing for your existence. It means trusting that your needs are valid, your feelings are information, and your desire for real connection is one of the most human things about you. Think about it this way. When we're building rockets, we don't try to make them smaller and lighter by removing essential systems. We don't strip out the guidance computers because they're complex. We don't eliminate the life support systems because they add weight. We don't simplify the design to the point where it can't actually accomplish the mission. Instead, we honor the complexity. We build infrastructure that can handle it. We create systems that support all the necessary functions, even when that makes things more complicated, more expensive, more difficult to build. Your heart is the same way. It's complex, it has systems and needs and requirements that can't be simplified away. You need honesty. You need depth. You need someone who shows up consistently, who can handle your questions, who isn't threatened by your intelligence or your intensity or your refusal to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Those aren't excessive requirements. They're the basic infrastructure needed for the kind of love that actually goes somewhere, that actually builds something, that actually matters. And the right person, the person who's actually capable of loving you, won't see those needs as problems. They'll see them as specifications. They'll see them as the design requirements for a real relationship. They'll understand that depth requires infrastructure, that honesty requires courage, that real connection requires both people to show up fully, without masks, without performance, without the constant calculation of how much is safe to reveal. But here's what you need to understand. You won't find that person by continuing to make yourself smaller. You won't attract someone capable of depth by pretending you're content with surface. You won't build something real by starting with a false foundation. If you want a relationship that honors who you actually are, you have to start being who you actually are. You have to stop performing. You have to stop editing. You have to stop managing everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own truth. This means you're going to make some people uncomfortable. When you stop shrinking, when you start taking up space, when you begin speaking honestly about what you need, some people won't like it. They'll call you difficult. They'll say you've changed, that you're not as easygoing as you used to be, that you're being too demanding. Let them. Their discomfort is not your emergency. Their inability to handle your fullness is not evidence that you need to shrink again. It's evidence that they were only comfortable with the reduced version, the performance, the lie you were telling about who you were. The people who are meant for you, the people who are actually capable of loving you, will respond differently. They won't be intimidated by your depth. They'll be curious about it. They won't be threatened by your questions. They'll engage with them. They won't see your needs as burdens. They'll see them as opportunities to show up, to build something together, to create the kind of intimacy that most people only talk about, but never actually experience. And yes, those people are rare. Let's be honest about that. Most people are operating on autopilot, following scripts they absorb without ever examining them, repeating patterns that don't serve them but feel familiar. Most people want relationships that are comfortable more than they want relationships that are real. Most people would rather maintain their existing patterns than do the hard work of growing. And you can't change that. You can't force someone to want depth if they're content with surface. You can't convince someone to be brave if they prefer comfort. You can't make someone choose growth if they're invested in staying the same. But you can choose differently for yourself. You can choose to honor your own complexity. You can choose to speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You can choose to maintain your standards, even when you're lonely, even when it would be easier to settle, even when everyone around you is telling you to lower your expectations. You can choose to be fully yourself and trust that the right person will meet you there, not someday in the distant future after you've fixed yourself, but now as you are, with all your depth and intensity and refusal to settle for less than real. This is not easy. I want to be clear about that. Choosing yourself, maintaining your standards, refusing to shrink these things are hard, especially when you're surrounded by messages telling you to be more flexible, more understanding, more willing to compromise, especially when you're watching other people settle for less and call it happiness, especially when you're alone on a Friday night while everyone else seems to be in easy, comfortable relationships that don't require the kind of depth you crave. But easy and right are not the same thing. Comfortable and fulfilling are not the same thing. Being chosen and being truly loved are not the same thing. You've spent enough time choosing easy, comfortable, and being chosen by people who couldn't actually love you. You've spent enough time believing that the problem was you, that you needed to be less, that your depth was a defect rather than a gift. You've spent enough time in relationships that felt like you were building alone while someone else took credit for the architecture. It's time to choose differently. It's time to build with people who actually show up. It's time to stop accepting breadcrumbs and start demanding the whole meal. It's time to stop apologizing for who you are and start celebrating it. It's time to understand that you're not hard to love. You just loved the wrong way, for the wrong people, for far too long. And now you know better. Now you can do better. Now you can choose yourself with the same intensity you used to choose people who didn't choose you back. When I look at the future, whether it's Mars colonies or sustainable energy or the evolution of human consciousness, I'm always thinking about what's possible, not what's comfortable. I'm thinking about what we could build if we were willing to do the hard things, to question our assumptions, to break free from the limitations that previous generations accepted as inevitable. And that same principle applies to love, to relationships, to the question of how we connect with each other. What's possible for you right now is a life where you stop performing and start existing, where you stop managing everyone else's comfort and start honoring your own truth, where you stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never designed for you and start building your own architecture, your own specifications, your own design for what love should look like. What's possible is a relationship where both people show up fully, where honesty is the foundation rather than something to be rationed carefully, where depth is celebrated rather than feared. But that possibility requires you to let go of the old story, the story that says you're too much, the story that says your needs are excessive, the story that says you should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention people are willing to give you. That story is based on lies, lies about who you are, lies about what you deserve, lies about what's actually possible when two people are willing to be brave enough to build something real. The truth is this: you are exactly as much as you're supposed to be. Your depth is not a defect, it's your design. Your honesty is not drama, it's your operating system. Your desire for real connection is not neediness, it's your purpose. And the people who couldn't handle that, they weren't wrong to leave. They were honest about their own limitations, even if they didn't frame it that way. They showed you that they weren't capable of meeting you where you are, of building what you wanted to build, of going as deep as you were willing to go. And that information, as painful as it was to receive, was valuable. It showed you who not to build with. It showed you what not to accept. It showed you that settling for less than you need leads to a kind of slow death, a gradual erasure of yourself in service of keeping someone else comfortable. Now you know better. Now you understand that the right person won't require you to shrink. They'll create space for you to expand. They won't be threatened by your questions. They'll have answers. They won't see your needs as problems. They'll see them as opportunities to show up, to prove themselves, to build something together. They won't ask you to be less. They'll challenge you to be more. They won't make you feel like your love is a burden. They'll treat it like the gift it is. And when you find that person, or when they find you, it won't feel like the relationships you've had before. It won't feel like work in the exhausting sense, like you're constantly managing and performing and trying to be acceptable. It will feel like building, like collaboration, like two people with complementary skills and shared vision working together towards something neither could create alone. There will still be challenges, still be conflicts, still be moments of friction, but those moments will feel different. They'll feel like growth rather than evidence that something's wrong. They'll feel like opportunities rather than threats. They'll feel like proof that you're building something real rather than maintaining something false. But you have to be willing to wait for that. You have to be willing to be alone rather than accepting relationships that diminish you. You have to be willing to maintain your standards even when it's lonely, even when it's hard, even when everyone around you is settling and calling it wisdom. You have to trust that your needs are valid, that your depth is valuable, that your refusal to accept less than real love is not pickiness. It's self-respect. And in the meantime, while you're waiting, you can't just be passive. You can't just sit around hoping someone will show up who's capable of loving you. You have to build yourself. You have to invest in your own growth, your own healing, your own evolution. You have to become the kind of person who's ready for the kind of love you want. Not by shrinking, but by expanding. Not by fixing your flaws, but by embracing your fullness. Not by becoming more convenient, but by becoming more authentically yourself. This is the work. This is the mission. This is what matters. Not finding someone who will accept a reduced version of you, but becoming so fully yourself that you naturally repel people who can't handle your fullness and attract people who can. Not learning to need less, but learning to honor your needs without apology. Not figuring out how to be easier to love, but understanding that you were never hard to love. You just kept loving people who weren't capable of loving you back. Time is the most valuable resource we have. Every day you spend trying to make yourself smaller for someone who can't appreciate your fullness is a day you're not spending building something real. Every moment you waste on people who require you to perform instead of exist is a moment you're stealing from your own future, from your own possibility, from your own chance at the kind of love that actually transforms you rather than diminishes you. So stop wasting time. Stop giving your energy to people who don't match it. Stop accepting breadcrumbs when you're capable of building entire ecosystems. Stop believing that you're too much when the truth is that you've been with people who offer too little. Stop apologizing for wanting depth, for asking questions, for refusing to pretend that surface-level connection is enough. Stop making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for someone like you. Instead, build your own space. Create your own architecture. Design your own specifications for what love should look like. And then, and this is the important part, have the courage to maintain those standards. Have the courage to walk away from anything that doesn't meet them. Have the courage to be alone rather than accepting less than what you need. Have the courage to trust that someone exists who can meet you where you are, who won't be intimidated by your depth, who will see your intensity not as a problem, but as proof that you're someone worth knowing. That person exists. They're out there, probably doing their own work, probably healing from their own experiences with people who couldn't handle depth, probably wondering if anyone exists who wants what they want. And when two people who've both done the work, who've both refused to settle, who've both maintained their standards despite the loneliness, when those two people find each other, that's when something extraordinary becomes possible. That's when you can build something that actually lasts, that actually matters, that actually changes the trajectory of both your lives. But it starts with you. It starts with the decision to stop shrinking. It starts with the commitment to honor your own complexity. It starts with the understanding that you are not hard to love. You just loved the wrong way, for the wrong people, for far too long. And now that you know better, you can do better. Now that you understand the difference between being chosen and being truly loved, you can hold out for the latter. Now that you've seen what happens when you try to build with people who aren't willing to do the work, you can wait for someone who is. This is your moment. This is where everything changes. Not because someone finally chooses you, not because you finally figure out how to be easy enough for someone to handle, but because you choose yourself. Because you decide that your needs are valid, your feelings are important, your depth is valuable. Because you stop betraying yourself to make other people comfortable. Because you understand, finally, that love isn't supposed to feel like an apology. It's supposed to feel like coming home. You were never hard to love. You just kept loving people who made you feel that way because they couldn't rise to meet you where you are.